The low hum of the VR pod filled the darkened lab as David adjusted the neural interface. His fingers trembled slightly with anticipation as he initiated the startup sequence for Anthropic's latest experimental system. "All right, let's see what this baby can do," he muttered, settling back as the pod sealed around him. The lab faded away as the virtual environment materialized. David blinked, taking in the alien landscape before him. Towering crystalline spires stretched toward a violet sky streaked with swirling auroras. Two moons hung low on the horizon, casting an eerie glow across the barren terrain. "Damn, the graphics on this are insane," David whispered, turning in a slow circle. Every detail was flawless, indistinguishable from reality. He could feel the crunch of crystalline sand beneath his feet, smell the faint metallic tang in the air. A distant screech echoed across the landscape, making David jump. "Okay, creepy alien world. Check. Now where's the tutorial?" He patted his pockets, searching for some kind of inventory or menu interface, but found nothing. "Hello? Game guide? Anyone?" David called out, his voice echoing. Only silence answered him. An uneasy feeling began to creep over him. This was more immersive than any VR he'd experienced before. A flash of movement caught his eye. David spun, catching a glimpse of gleaming blue skin and feathered wings disappearing behind a crystal formation. "Hey, wait!" he called out, breaking into a run. His feet slipped on the loose sand as he rounded the corner. He skidded to a halt, breath catching in his throat. Before him stood the most breathtakingly beautiful woman, no, creature, he had ever seen. Smooth azure skin seemed to glow from within, accentuating curves that defied belief. Iridescent wings were folded against her back, trembling slightly. But it was her eyes that captivated David, deep pools of liquid silver that seemed to peer into his very soul. Hi there," David managed, his mouth suddenly dry. "I'm David. Are you part of this game?" The creature's brow furrowed in confusion. When she spoke, her voice was melodic, with an otherworldly resonance. "Game? I do not understand. I am Illyria, emissary of the Seraphim. Why have you come to this sacred place, human?" David blinked. This AI was incredibly advanced. "Right, okay. I'm just testing out a new VR system. Gotta say, you guys have outdone yourselves with the NPC dialogue." Illyria took a step back, wings unfurling slightly. "Your words are strange to me. This is no fabrication. You stand upon Celestia, homeworld of the Seraphim. How did you come to be here?" "Look, this is a really cool game and all, but can we skip the exposition? Where's the menu? How do I start the actual gameplay?" David was starting to feel frustrated. He reached out to grab Illyria's arm, thinking to trigger some kind of interaction prompt. The moment his fingers brushed her skin, a jolt of energy surged through him. The world seemed to blur and shift around them. When David's vision cleared, they were standing in a cavernous chamber filled with strange, pulsing technology. Illyria yanked her arm away, eyes wide with fear and confusion. "What have you done? This is the heart of Celestia. None but the highest seraphim may enter here." David's head was spinning. This felt far too real. A gnawing sense of dread was building in his gut. I didn't do anything. What's going on? Where are we?" Illyria's wings flared out, nearly spanning the width of the chamber. "You have committed a grave transgression, human. The Council will not—" Her words were cut off by a blaring alarm. Pulsing red light filled the chamber as a booming voice echoed. "Intruder alert! Unauthorized presence detected in the heart chamber. All units converge." Panic seized David. If this was a game, it had gone way off the rails. And if it wasn't— He grabbed Illyria's wrist, ignoring her protests. "We need to get out of here. Now!" His eyes darted around the chamber, landing on a glowing pedestal near the center. Without thinking, he dragged Illyria toward it. "Stop! You don't know what you're doing!" Illyria cried. But it was too late. David slammed his hand down on the pedestal. The world dissolved into blinding light. When it faded, they were standing in a lush jungle, the air thick with the calls of alien wildlife. Illyria wrenched free of his grasp, stumbling back. "By the celestial spheres, do you realize what you've done? You've activated a portal network that hasn't been used in millennia." David's mind reeled as the full weight of the situation crashed down on him. This was no game. Somehow, he had been transported to another world, and he'd just kidnapped some kind of alien angel. "Oh shit," he whispered. "I am so screwed." Illyria's wings twitched nervously as she scanned their surroundings. "We cannot linger here. The activation of the portal will have alerted both the Seraphim and others. We must seek shelter and determine our next course of action." David nodded numbly, still struggling to process everything. As they moved deeper into the jungle, he couldn't help stealing glances at Illyria. Despite the dire situation, he found himself captivated by her otherworldly beauty. "So, you're some kind of alien angel?" he ventured after a while. Illyria shot him an exasperated look. "I am a seraph, yes, though I suspect your primitive understanding cannot fully grasp the complexities of my people." "Hey, I'll have you know I've seen every season of Ancient Aliens," David quipped, then immediately regretted it when Illyria's brow furrowed in confusion. "Your attempts at humor are perplexing," she said, "but I sense no true malice in you. Tell me, David of Earth, how did you come to be on Celestia?" As they pushed through the dense foliage, David explained about the VR system and his job as a tester. Illyria listened intently, occasionally asking questions that made David realize just how advanced her civilization must be. "A fascinating tale," she mused. "It seems the boundaries between our realities are more permeable than we realized. This could have grave implications for the balance of power in our galaxy." David's foot caught on a root, sending him sprawling. Illyria's reflexes were lightning fast. She caught him before he hit the ground, strong arms wrapping around him. For a moment, they were pressed close together, and David felt his heart rate spike. Illyria quickly set him back on his feet, a faint purple tinge coloring her cheeks. "You must be more careful. This world holds many dangers for one such as you." "Right, yeah. Thanks," David mumbled, trying to ignore the lingering sensation of her touch. He cleared his throat. "So, you mentioned something about being an emissary? What exactly does that entail?" Illyria's expression grew somber. "I am a spiritual leader among my people, tasked with maintaining peace and harmony throughout the galaxy. My disappearance will cause great distress among the Seraphim, and our enemies may seek to take advantage of the chaos." The gravity of the situation hit David anew. "Oh man, I've really messed things up, haven't I? I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." Illyria held up a hand to silence him. "What's done is done. We must focus on finding a way to return me to my people before conflict erupts. But first, we need to establish a secure location." As if on cue, the foliage behind them erupted with movement. A creature burst forth, easily twice David's size, with multiple writhing limbs and gnashing mandibles. "Celestial spheres preserve us," Illyria breathed. "A void stalker. Run!" They took off through the jungle, the monstrous creature in hot pursuit. David's lungs burned as he struggled to keep up with Illyria's graceful strides. Just when he thought his legs would give out, they broke through the tree line onto a rocky cliff face. "There!" Illyria pointed to a narrow crevice in the rock. "Quickly!" They squeezed into the opening just as the Voidstalker crashed out of the jungle. Its roars of frustration echoed as they pressed deeper into the hidden cave system. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, David slumped against the cave wall. Okay, he panted. I officially hate this game, or whatever the hell this is. Illyria's wings rustled as she settled beside him. You handled yourself well for one unused to such perils. Perhaps you are not entirely hopeless. David couldn't be sure in the dim light, but he thought he caught a hint of a smile on her lips. Gee, thanks. That means a lot coming from Little Miss Perfect Angel. Illyria tilted her head. I do not understand why you insist on using these strange appellations. My name is Illyria. It's called sarcasm, Allie. You might want to look into it, David retorted, then paused. Is it okay if I call you Allie? She considered for a moment. I suppose that would be acceptable, and I believe I am beginning to grasp this. Sarcasm. It is a form of humor, yes? David couldn't help but chuckle. You're catching on quick. Maybe there's hope for you yet. As they settled in for the night, David's mind raced with questions. He found himself particularly fixated on one. Hey, Ali, this is going to sound weird, but is it possible for seraphim and humans to, reproduce? Illyria's eyes widened, that purple blush returning to her cheeks. That is a rather intimate query. While our species share some biological similarities, I do not believe such a union has ever been attempted. The offspring of such a pairing would likely possess unique characteristics. David nodded, trying to seem nonchalant even as his imagination ran wild. Right, yeah. Just, scientific curiosity. Illyria studied him for a long moment, her silver eyes seeming to pierce right through him. Your interest seems to extend beyond mere academic inquiry, David. I must admit, I find myself intrigued by you as well. Humans are not what I expected. A warm flutter stirred in David's chest. Despite the insane circumstances, he couldn't deny the growing attraction he felt toward Illyria. Her otherworldly beauty was mesmerizing, but it was her mix of wisdom and naivety that truly captivated him. David lay beside Illyria, the warmth of her presence close, stirring something deep within him. Her glowing azure skin shimmered softly in the dim light of the cave, and her wings, folded gently at her sides, trembled as though reflecting the same anticipation he felt. He couldn't deny the overwhelming connection between them, something far beyond any virtual reality experience he'd ever encountered. If this was still a game, it had transcended the digital realm and touched something more profound, something real. Without words, their eyes met, and Illyria's silver gaze softened, her curiosity and unfamiliarity evident but mixed with a strange desire. Her wings unfurled slightly, the shimmering feathers quivering, sending a cascade of soft light across the cave walls. David hesitated for a moment, unsure, but then she reached out, her hand gentle as it touched his chest. Her touch was electric, sending shivers down his spine. His breath caught as she leaned in closer, her wings stretching out to their full span. The air felt thick with a tension he couldn't name, a mix of awe, attraction, and something unknown. When her wings moved, they made a soft, rhythmic sound, trembling as though reacting to every moment, every breath they shared. Illyria's touch grew more confident, and soon her wings surrounded them both, encircling David in a cocoon of warmth and light. It was an experience unlike anything he had ever imagined. The sensation of her wings gently brushing against his skin sent waves of pleasure rippling through him, as though the very essence of her being was somehow communicating with him on a level deeper than physical touch. For Illyria, it was clearly strange too. Her face was a mixture of wonder and confusion, as though navigating something entirely foreign. But together, they moved in sync, as if the distance between their species, their worlds, and their realities was no longer a barrier. The wings, at first uncertain, soon wrapped around him completely, holding him with surprising strength. The light caress of the feathers against his skin was mesmerizing, heightening every sensation. As their connection deepened, time seemed to lose meaning. Each moment, each movement felt eternal. The soft glow of her body, the warmth of her wings, the way she trembled as they embraced. It was otherworldly, transcendent. David could hardly comprehend the rush of emotions flooding him. If this was a game, it was the most vivid, most intense experience he had ever known. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. It was something far more real than any VR could simulate. When they finally lay together, their bodies still intertwined, Illyria's wings slowly relaxed their grip. Her breathing was calm, but her eyes still sparkled with wonder. David, too, was breathless, trying to wrap his mind around what had just happened. He gently reached out and brushed a hand through her silky azure hair, smiling softly as she blinked at him in quiet amazement. "This is unlike anything I've ever known," she whispered, her voice a melody in the silence. David chuckled softly, his head spinning. "You and me both." They drifted into sleep in each other's arms, the soft hum of her wings still resonating faintly in the background. The next morning brought new challenges. As they ventured out of the cave, the distant sound of engines filled the air. A sleek, silver craft streaked across the sky, emblazoned with an unfamiliar insignia. Illyria's face paled. "The Void Consortium. They must have detected the portal activation. We cannot allow them to capture us. The consequences would be catastrophic for both our peoples." David's stomach churned with a mix of fear and excitement. "So, what's the plan? We can't exactly blend in with the locals." Illyria's wings twitched nervously. "We must find another portal, one that can return us to Celestia. I can explain the situation to the Council and prevent this misunderstanding from escalating into full-scale war." "Great, sure. Portal hunting. Piece of cake," David muttered. "Any idea where we might find one of those?" Illyria pointed to a distant mountain range, its peaks shrouded in mist. "The ancients often built their gateways in places of great natural power. Those mountains may hold what we seek." As they set off toward the mountains, David couldn't shake the feeling that their adventure was only beginning. Little did he know just how right he was, or how their growing bond would be tested in the trials to come. The ground trembled beneath their feet as David and Illyria crested another crystalline hill. In the valley below, a vast alien metropolis sprawled out before them, its towering spires pulsing with ethereal light. "Whoa!" David breathed, eyes wide. "I don't think we're in Kansas anymore, Toto." Illyria shot him a quizzical look. "I do not understand this reference, and we are far from any place called Kansas. This is Nexus Prime, a neutral trading hub frequented by species from across the galaxy." David chuckled, shaking his head. "Never mind. So what's our plan here? I'm guessing we can't just waltz in and ask for directions to the nearest interdimensional portal." "Indeed not," Illyria replied, her wings twitching nervously. "We must exercise caution. The Void Consortium has spies everywhere, and news of my disappearance will have spread far and wide by now." As they made their way down into the city, David couldn't shake the surreal feeling that had plagued him since this adventure began. On impulse, he pinched himself hard. "Ow! Okay, definitely not dreaming," he muttered. Illyria raised an eyebrow. "Are you well, David? You seem distressed." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. I keep expecting to wake up, you know? For all of this to have been some crazy VR malfunction, but it feels so real." A look of concern crossed Illyria's face. She reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. The touch sent a jolt through David's system. "I assure you, this is no fabrication," she said softly. "Though I confess I sometimes wish it were. The weight of our predicament." David covered her hand with his own, offering a reassuring squeeze. "Hey, we'll figure this out, together." Their eyes met, and for a moment the bustle of the alien city faded away. David found himself leaning in, drawn by some irresistible force. Illyria's breath hitched, her silvery eyes widening. Just as their lips were about to meet, a cacophony of alarms blared through the city. They sprang apart, startled. "Attention, citizens!" a booming voice echoed. "A Level 5 security breach has been detected. All non-essential personnel must return to their dwellings immediately." "Well, that can't be good," David muttered. Illyria's wings flared out, her posture tense. "We must move quickly. Follow me." They darted through winding alleys, dodging panicked aliens of all shapes and sizes. David's heart raced, adrenaline coursing through his veins. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a squad of heavily armed guards. "Halt! Identify yourselves!" the lead guard barked. Without thinking, David stepped in front of Illyria, arms outstretched. "Run!" he shouted. To his shock, a shimmering barrier sprang into existence around them. Energy bolts from the guard's weapons splashed harmlessly against it. "By the celestial spheres!" Illyria gasped. "David, how are you doing this?" David stared at his hands in disbelief. I have no idea." Taking advantage of the guard's confusion, they sprinted away. As they ran, David's mind reeled. First, he'd been transported to another dimension. Now he had some kind of force field powers. What the hell was going on? They eventually found refuge in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. As they caught their breath, Illyria studied David with a mix of awe and curiosity. "I have never seen a human display such abilities," she mused. "This is most unexpected." David paced nervously, flexing his hands. "You're telling me? I don't suppose this is standard for your average interdimensional tourist." Illyria shook her head. "No, it is not. David, I believe there is more to your presence here than mere chance. These powers you've manifested, they are reminiscent of ancient seraphim legends." David's eyebrows shot up. "Whoa, wait. Are you saying I'm some kind of chosen one? Because I've seen that movie, and it usually doesn't end well for the protagonist." Despite the gravity of the situation, Illyria couldn't suppress a small smile. "Your humor continues to perplex me. But no, I do not believe you are a chosen one in the sense you imply. However, your arrival and these newfound abilities cannot be coincidence." As they discussed theories, David found his gaze continually drawn to Illyria. The way her wings shimmered in the dim light, the graceful curve of her neck. He cleared his throat, trying to focus. "So, speaking of unexpected things," he ventured, "that moment earlier, before the alarms, are you allowed to, Illyria tilted her head, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "Are you inquiring about the permissibility of intimate relations between seraphim and other species?" David felt his face flush. "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds kind of creepy. But, yeah, I guess I am." To his surprise, Illyria laughed, a melodious sound that sent warmth blooming in his chest. "Oh, David, for beings as long-lived as the seraphim, such taboos would be impractical. While it is uncommon, it is not forbidden." "Oh," David said, a grin spreading across his face. "Well, that's good to know." Their eyes met again, the earlier tension returning. This time there were no alarms to interrupt as David leaned in. Their lips met in a soft, exploratory kiss that quickly deepened. David marveled at the otherworldly sensation. Illyria's skin was cooler than a human's, with a faint electric tingle that sent shivers down his spine. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Illyria's wings were fluttering rapidly. "That was most enlightening," she murmured. David couldn't help but chuckle. "Glad I could contribute to your scientific understanding." As they prepared to rest for the night, David's thoughts turned to the mystery of his presence in this dimension. On a whim, he called out, "Computer, end simulation." Illyria raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" David shrugged, feeling slightly foolish. "I don't know. Part of me is still hoping this is all some elaborate VR experience. Exit program. Show menu." His antics drew another musical laugh from Illyria. "I assure you, no amount of verbal commands will alter our reality, though I must admit, your attempts are quite amusing." As they settled in for the night, David's mind raced with questions. How had he ended up here? What was the source of his newfound powers? And most pressingly, how were they going to stop an intergalactic war? The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planet hopping and narrow escapes. They traversed bustling space stations, lush jungle worlds, and barren moons, always one step ahead of their pursuers. Along the way, David's protective abilities grew stronger. He found he could create barriers of varying sizes and even project force fields to push away attackers. Illyria was fascinated by his developing powers. "It's remarkable," she mused one evening as they camped on a cliff overlooking a purple ocean. "Your abilities seem to be tied to your emotions, particularly your desire to protect. It's not unlike the way young seraphim first manifest their gifts." David flexed his hand, watching sparks of energy dance between his fingers. "I still can't quite wrap my head around it. A month ago, I was just a normal guy with a weird job. Now I'm some kind of superhero in an alien universe." Illyria's expression grew thoughtful. "Perhaps that is the key. Your presence here, your abilities, they defy the natural laws of our reality." A theory began to form in David's mind. The VR system I was testing, what if it didn't just transport me here? What if it somehow split me? Illyria's eyes widened. "You believe you exist in two places at once?" David nodded slowly. "It would explain a lot. Why I can't simply log out of this world. Why I have these powers that shouldn't be possible for a human. Maybe part of me is still in that VR pod while another part was, I don't know, quantum entangled with this dimension or something." "Fascinating," Illyria breathed. "If true, it could have profound implications for the nature of consciousness and reality itself." As they delved deeper into the mystery, their bond continued to grow. Stolen kisses turned to passionate embraces, and David found himself falling hard for the beautiful alien who was equal parts warrior and scholar. But their moments of peace were always short-lived. The Void Consortium's forces seemed to be everywhere, and whispers of impending war grew louder with each passing day. It was during a tense negotiation with a group of information brokers that they finally caught a break. In exchange for David using his powers to protect their hidden base from detection, the brokers provided a crucial piece of intelligence. The Void Consortium's leader, Admiral Zexthor, has been secretly meeting with a high-ranking Seraphim official. The broker's tentacled appendage gestured to a holo display. "We believe they are conspiring to ignite a full-scale war, using your disappearance as a catalyst, emissary Illyria." Illyria's wings flared in shock. "Impossible. The Seraphim would never." "I'm afraid the evidence is quite compelling," the broker continued. "We've traced their communications to a hidden base on Celestia itself." David placed a comforting hand on Illyria's shoulder. "Hey, every group has its bad apples. The important thing is, we know now. We can stop this before it's too late." Illyria nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "You're right. We must return to Celestia at once and expose this treachery before it's too late." As they prepared for the perilous journey back to Illyria's homeworld, David couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. They were racing against time, with the fate of multiple civilizations hanging in the balance. And through it all, one question nagged at him. If he truly was split between two realities, What would happen when this adventure came to an end? Could he bear to leave this world and Illyria behind? With a deep breath, David pushed the thoughts aside. They had a war to prevent. Everything else would have to wait. The crystalline spires of Celestia loomed before them as David and Illyria's stolen ship pierced the planet's atmosphere. Chaos erupted across the city below. Streams of panicked seraphim took to the skies, while squadrons of sleek fighters darted between buildings. "Looks like we're just in time for the party," David quipped, his knuckles white as he gripped the controls. Illyria's wings rustled nervously. "The situation is worse than I feared. We must reach the High Council chambers immediately." As they weaved through the aerial mayhem, a barrage of energy blasts rocked their ship. David's newly honed instincts kicked in, a shimmering barrier materializing around their vessel. "Hang on!" he shouted, pushing the ship into a steep dive. They careened between towering structures, pursued by a swarm of Void Consortium fighters. Illyria's eyes widened as she saw their destination. "David, the landing pad is swarming with hostile forces." "Who said anything about landing?" David flashed a roguish grin. "Hope those wings of yours are up for a workout." Before Illyria could protest, David yanked hard on the controls. The ship spun wildly, its hatch bursting open. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Illyria around the waist and leapt from the careening vessel. They plummeted through the air, David's heart pounding as he extended his free hand. A pulsing energy field enveloped them, slowing their descent. Illyria's wings snapped open, catching an updraft and guiding them to a graceful landing on a nearby balcony. "That was exhilarating," Illyria breathed, a hint of admiration in her eyes. David grinned, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "What can I say? I'm a man of many talents." Their moment of triumph was short-lived. The balcony doors burst open, revealing a squad of armed seraphim guards. "Emissary Illyria," the lead guard exclaimed. "You're alive, but who is this human?" Illyria stepped forward, her posture regal despite the chaos around them. "This is David, my protector and ally. We bring urgent news of treachery within the High Council itself." The guards exchanged wary glances. "Emissary, with all due respect, the human's presence here is a violation of our most sacred laws. We must detain you both until—" David's patience snapped. He thrust out his hands, a rippling barrier forming between them and the guards. "Look, we don't have time for this. There's a war about to start in case you hadn't noticed, so either help us stop it or get out of our way." The lead guard's eyes widened in shock. "Impossible. Those abilities. They're like the legends of the Eternal Shield." Illyria seized the moment of confusion. "Please, we must speak with the Council immediately. The fate of our people hangs in the balance." After a tense moment, the guard nodded. "Follow me, quickly." As they raced through opulent corridors, David marveled at the otherworldly beauty of the seraphim architecture. Crystalline structures pulsed with inner light, and every surface seemed to shimmer with an ethereal glow. They burst into a vast circular chamber just as a heated argument reached its crescendo. Dozens of winged figures turned to stare at the new arrivals. "Illyria?" A regal seraphim with elaborately patterned wings gasped. "By the celestial spheres, you've returned." "High Counselor Zephyria," Illyria bowed her head respectfully. "I come with dire warnings. There is a traitor in our midst, conspiring with the Void Consortium to plunge our worlds into war." Murmurs of shock rippled through the assembly. David scanned the faces, trying to gauge who might be their hidden enemy. A deep voice boomed from the far side of the chamber. "Preposterous! These are the ravings of a deluded mind. Clearly, this human has corrupted our beloved emissary." David's eyes narrowed as he focused on the speaker, a broad-shouldered seraphim with midnight black wings. Something about the way he carried himself set off alarm bells in David's mind. "And who might you be?" David challenged, stepping forward. The Seraphim's eyes flashed dangerously. "I am High Commander Azrael, protector of Celestia, and you, human, are an abomination that should never have set foot on our sacred world." Illyria's wings flared in anger. "How dare you, Azrael? David has risked everything to help our people. His abilities rival those of our greatest legends." As if on cue, the chamber shook with the impact of a massive explosion. Cracks spiderwebbed across the crystalline dome above them. "We're under attack!" someone shouted. David didn't hesitate. He thrust his arm skyward, a pulsing dome of energy expanding to encompass the entire chamber just as the ceiling shattered. Crystalline shards rained down, bouncing harmlessly off his barrier. Gasps of awe echoed through the assembly. Even Azrael seemed momentarily stunned. "Impossible," he whispered. Illyria seized the moment. "Esteemed Council, we have evidence that Commander Azrael has been secretly meeting with Admiral Zexthor of the Void Consortium. They engineered my disappearance to create a pretext for war." Azrael's face contorted with rage. "Lies! I'll not stand for this slander!" He lunged forward, energy crackling around his fists. David stepped between him and Illyria, his barrier solidifying into a wall. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, big guy." What followed was chaos. As Void Consortium forces breached the city's defenses, the council chamber erupted into a frenzy of accusations and counter-accusations. David found himself constantly expanding and reinforcing his protective field, shielding not just Illyria, but the entire Seraphim leadership from waves of attacks. Through it all, Illyria's voice rang out clear and strong, presenting their evidence and pleading for unity in the face of true threat. David marveled at her strength and conviction, feeling a swell of pride and something deeper as he watched her fight for her people. Hours blurred together as the battle raged. David's muscles screamed with exertion, sweat pouring down his face as he poured every ounce of his newfound power into maintaining their defense. Just when he thought he couldn't hold on any longer, a hush fell over the chamber. An ancient seraphim, his wings barely more than wisps of light, glided forward. The assembled leaders parted reverently before him. "The Oracle," Illyria breathed, awe evident in her voice. The wizened figure's eyes locked onto David, seeming to peer into his very soul. When he spoke, his voice was like the whisper of wind through leaves. "At last, the shield has returned to us, just as it was foretold eons ago." David blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry. What now?" The Oracle smiled enigmatically. "Your coming was prophesied, young one. A being of two worlds, neither fully here nor there, who would stand as the bulwark against our darkest hour." As the Oracle's words sank in, realization dawned on Azrael's face. With a howl of rage, he lunged at David, dark energy swirling around him. Time seemed to slow. David felt a surge of power unlike anything he'd experienced before. His barrier expanded, not just deflecting Azrael's attack but enveloping the entire city. A dome of shimmering energy stretched as far as the eye could see, repelling the Void Consortium's assault. In that moment of respite, Illyria's words finally broke through the din. Leaders from both factions listened in stunned silence as she laid bare the full extent of Azrael's betrayal. With their plans exposed, Azrael and his co-conspirators were quickly apprehended. As the immediate threat subsided, David felt his strength begin to ebb. He stumbled, nearly collapsing before Illyria caught him. "Easy there, hero," she murmured, a mix of concern and affection in her eyes. The Oracle glided forward once more. "You have done well, David of Earth, but I'm afraid your journey is not yet complete." David straightened, leaning heavily on Illyria. "What do you mean?" Your presence here is a paradox, the oracle explained. A piece of you remains in your own world, tethered to the device that brought you here. This duality cannot persist indefinitely. David's heart sank as the implications became clear. You're saying I have to go back? The oracle nodded solemnly. To remain here would be to sever your connection to your own reality. The consequences could be catastrophic. Illyria's grip on David tightened. There must be another way, she pleaded. I'm afraid not, child. The oracle's voice was gentle but firm. But take heart. The boundaries between our worlds have been weakened. With time and effort, it may be possible to forge a more stable connection. David turned to Illyria, his throat tight with emotion. I don't want to leave you, he whispered. Illyria cupped his face in her hands, her silver eyes shimmering with unshed tears. And I don't want to lose you, but we must think beyond ourselves. Our peoples need us. David nodded, steeling himself. How long do we have? The oracle considered for a moment. The energies align twice in each revolution of your world. On those days, the veil between our realities will be at its thinnest. A plan began to form in David's mind. Okay, so twice a year we meet. Same time, same place. I'll find a way back, I promise. Illyria managed a watery smile. I'll hold you to that, David of Earth. Their farewell was bittersweet, filled with tender embraces and whispered promises. As David felt himself beginning to fade, drawn back to his own reality, Illyria called out one last time. David, I'll be waiting for you. We'll be waiting for you. His eyes widened in realization just as the world dissolved around him. We? Illyria, are you? David gasped as his eyes flew open, finding himself back in the VR pod. His mind reeled, trying to process everything that had happened. Had it all been some sort of hyper-realistic simulation? But no, he could still feel the lingering warmth of Illyria's touch, the echo of her final words. In the months that followed, David threw himself into his work with a newfound passion. He pored over the data from his malfunction, searching for any clue that might help him bridge the gap between worlds. Finally, after 2 long years of sleepless nights and relentless determination, David made a breakthrough. Using a combination of quantum entanglement and the original VR technology, he created a stable portal between dimensions. With heart pounding, he stepped through, finding himself once again on the crystalline cliffs of Celestia. And there, silhouetted against the alien sky, stood Illyria, more beautiful than ever, with a small winged figure held close in her arms. David, Illyria breathed, her eyes shining with joy. You came back to us. He crossed the distance between them in a few long strides, gathering them both in his arms. As he gazed down at the perfect, blue-skinned face of his son, David felt a sense of completeness he'd never known before. I told you I'd find a way, he murmured, pressing a kiss to Illyria's forehead. Looks like we've got some catching up to do. As the small family stood together, bathed in the light of alien suns, David knew that his greatest adventure was only just beginning. Dear fellow travelers of the imagination, as we close the story on David and Illyria's tale, I hope their journey has stirred something within you. Perhaps it's a spark of wonder at the vastness of the universe, or a flutter of hope for connections that transcend the boundaries we think we know. Their story reminds us that love, courage, and determination can bridge even the gaps between worlds. It challenges us to look beyond the familiar, to find the extraordinary in ourselves and in others. Maybe you felt like David sometimes, caught between realities, struggling to reconcile different parts of your life. Or perhaps you've been Illyria, fighting for what's right even when it seems the whole universe is against you. Whatever resonated with you, I hope you carry a piece of this story forward. Let it inspire you to reach across divides, to protect what matters most, and to never stop searching for your own impossible connections. The universe is vast and full of wonders. Who knows what adventures await you just beyond the next star? Until our paths cross again in the cosmos of stories, your fellow dreamer and storyteller